r/Nosleep. Posted by u/Go Navy 27. I'm trapped in a city that's been cut off from the world and overrun with monsters. Again. And this time, it's my own damn fault. But here's the good news, I'm back. Surprise. I'm back. It's me, your favorite monster killer/amateur internet writer/idiot, Eli. Did you miss me? Am I making your whole week by coming back? I bet I am. Lucky for you, I just couldn't stay away. Turns out I actually really like writing my stories and sharing them with strangers. Plus, as Zoe pointed out when I mentioned that I was considering resuming my posts, they may help someone else recognize the signs, in case we don't succeed here and the people behind all this try to start again somewhere else. Or, at the very least, if this does happen somewhere else before we can stop it, at least my rules will help the poor souls stuck in that city. But hey, that's enough justification for my return. Did I really need justification anyway? If your answer is yes, shut up, I don't want to hear it. I want to write, so I will. Anyway, I guess I should start from where I left off, huh? It's been a wild, what? 5 weeks? Something like that. Feels like both yesterday and years ago that we got to experience the outside world for a grand total of a week. At least we got some updates on the crazy events of the past year while we were out. I mean, my year was still crazier, but I'll hand it to you guys, seems like even the world outside my city kind of went to shit in 2020. We managed to grab some masks, but I'll be honest, after the first week or two in this new dome, we stopped wearing them. Why? Well, because 1, a pretty solid portion of the population died early on, even our presence can't save most of an entire city, I mean, come on, and 2, no one's going anywhere anymore. We're all essentially in one giant quarantine bubble, pun kind of intended. But I digress. Onto the real story. You know where I left off. If you don't, I suggest you go read my previous set of stories, because boy, you've got a hell of a lot to catch up on. Here's the super speedy rundown of where we left off at my beautifully named end of the end. Zoe and I had made it to the next city, the dome locked us in, and the 4 of us, me, Zoe, Waffles, and Mr. Bailey, set off to kill some monsters and save some people. Hopefully enough to make a difference and ultimately stop the scientists behind these trials from moving on to another test run after this. If you need more of a refresher, sucks. Alright, that was uncalled for. I apologize. If you need more, just go read my previous stories. Seriously. Not that hard and they're pretty damn compelling, if I do say so myself. That day the dome appeared, day 0 as we've taken to calling it, was about as crazy and bloody as we expected. There were a lot of monsters and a lot of deaths. We saved everyone we could. And to those that we saved, we didn't say much. I learned my lesson about saying plans out loud after the Mike in the Alley massacre back home. We did, however, make sure to hand them several sheets of folded paper, my list of rules, and a map with a few locations marked for them to go to. We escorted them there when we could, but some we had to send on their own, weapons in hand, and hope for the best. There were just too many people and monsters to personally escort everyone to the locations we'd marked out. Let me explain. This is Zoe's pure genius in action. Mr. Bailey and Zoe scouted out locations in the first few days we were here, before the dome came down. We didn't have time to cover all of the city or even most of it, but we had enough time to find 2 other places besides our house that had no cameras. And hey, that was a pretty decent start. These 2 places were another house about a mile away from ours, and, in a nice twist of fate, a bookstore. Zoe was elated. You'd think a bunch of brilliant but evil scientists would have learned their lesson about not trusting bookstores, but apparently not, and we're sure as hell not complaining. It is true that most people don't make their home in a bookstore in the case of a monster apocalypse, Zoe's the exception. There may have been more places without cameras nearby, but keep in mind that the city was still functioning normally at this point. We can't just fucking waltz into people's apartments or something and say, hey, my cat and I are just stopping by to do a routine inspection for evil scientist cameras, cool with you? So, we were limited to places without people in them, aka the house for sale, or places that allowed pets, aka that very friendly bookstore that had a cat of its own. Taking our limited time and options into account, we were pretty satisfied finding even 2 additional places. All this to say that by the time the dome appeared, we'd printed a bunch of screenshots of Google Maps with the locations marked. We figured we'd do our best to get people to go to those places, and at least they'd be safer there than in camera-filled locations or strolling around the monster-infested streets. So that's how we spent day 0, killing monsters, giving info to people as best we could without revealing our plans, and hoping to God those people listened. I mean, most of the city still died, I think. It's not like we could save everyone. We're still only two partially healed people, a monster, and a cat, and we didn't have a ton of time or resources, okay. But we did what we could. And based on the people we've seen since, more of the city survived the initial attack than did ours. So, hey, gold stars for us. I won't get into much more detail about day 0, because it was pretty rough, although notably a significant improvement over my last day 0. RIP my entire family. This time I had Zoe, and it felt good to save people, but for every person or family we saved, we saw another 4 torn apart. And we literally watched the city get decimated. It was a functioning, bustling, normal place one day, and a monster hellscape the next. Turns out it's not any easier when you know it's coming. It still brought up all our memories of the first days when it happened to us. Trial Alpha, if you will. We're now in Trial Bravo. Hopefully there's never a Trial Charlie. Yes, I named them, and no, I am not creative at naming things. Did you need any further evidence than me naming all the monsters after people I knew in high school? The best part about day 0 was getting to let the science bastards know we're here. They might have known already, we have no idea how closely they were monitoring everything before the dome appeared. But we wanted to ensure they knew. Gotta gloat a little, you know? So, whenever we killed a monster and had a minute before anyone else was in immediate danger, we purposefully hacked into their chests and pulled out the cameras. I held each one right up in front of me, gave it a good old-fashioned middle finger, and said something along the lines of, "Surprise, fuckers. We're here, and we're coming for you." Zoe did similar. Kind of cheesy? Maybe. But I enjoyed it. It felt like a minor victory. And ultimately, I guess it worked, because by the evening, as we were hightailing it back to our house before dark, our path was suddenly blocked by an MJ. And, like the MJ after the Mike massacre, this one wasn't actively trying to trick us, but was acting as a messenger. Also like the MJ after the Mike massacre, it was wearing my face. I won't lie, when it stepped in front of us, I literally threw my hands in the air in the most exasperated fashion I could muster. I was exhausted, but it was worth being overly dramatic, since I knew they were watching. "Jesus Christ, again?" I said. "This trick is really getting old. You realize that I know I'm alive and you aren't fooling anyone, right?" Jamie smirked. "Obviously," it said. "But maybe soon you won't be." Its eyes flicked to Zoe. "And I bet it will be all too easy to convince her then." "Try me," said Zoe, her fingers tightening around her axe handle. But her voice gave her away, it wavered. Jamie only smiled wider. At the same time, it was holding out its fingerless hand, where a folded-up piece of paper was stapled to its palm. Well, you can't say the method of message delivery wasn't consistent. Glaring at Jamie, which was still eyeing Zoe in a way I really didn't like, I quickly reached out and tore it off, a little more forcefully than I needed to. Jamie dropped its hand but didn't move. "You can fuck off now," I said sharply. "Stop staring at my girlfriend and go crawl back into whatever hole you came out of." It winked at me and said, "See you soon," before turning and striding away. It was weird, seeing the back of my own head and wanting to punch it so badly. God, I hate MJs. Zoe nudged my shoulder, still looking a little shaken. "Open it," she said. I did, and the words on the page were written in the same handwriting as the notes we'd received in Alpha. "You're not supposed to be here. But now that you are, you won't be getting lucky again. Consider this your warning, we're watching you, and you won't be making it out alive. In the meantime, enjoy the show." After reading it, I looked up to the sky and shouted, "Oh shit, you're watching us? We had no idea. And is this empty threat supposed to scare us? Because you didn't want us to make it out alive last time, and here we are. Good luck, assholes." Then we had to run the rest of the way back to the house with Waffles tearing apart a Brent or two behind us, because my shouting attracted a few of them. Oops. We mostly weren't worried about the note, but we were a little. Not about the threat of killing us, nothing new there. No, the part that bothered us was the last sentence, "Enjoy the show." Sure, it could just mean seeing a whole second city get decimated, but it was bugging me. Zoe, too. I suspected it meant a bit more than that. Like, they had things we weren't prepared for. Which has turned out to be true. More on that later. We both cried that first night, you know. Admitting it doesn't make me less of a man, so fuck off if you think it does. Have you watched 2 entire city populations, including your family, get brutally murdered by monsters? No? Then you have no ground to stand on. Shut up and let a man cry with his girlfriend. It was just the impact of seeing all that death again, I think. The mangled bodies on the streets, walls and sidewalks painted red with blood, the smell of it all. I'm mostly used to death now, but the gore of that much murder at once is something I'd tried to forget after Alpha. I mean, I hadn't even seen more than a handful of people for over a year until we came to this city. And then as quickly as I saw them, I saw most of them die brutally. Not a great day. Having Zoe helped. We fell asleep on the bed, cuddling and crying. I still dreamed of last day 0, though, of my family's deaths. I relived it all over again, and I woke up at 3 a.m. with fresh tears on my cheeks. Really great stuff. I think Zoe had nightmares, too. When I woke up, she was whimpering in her sleep. I wrapped my arms around her and hugged her close, and she quieted, her face becoming more peaceful. That made me feel better. We got up super early the next morning, like as soon as the sun was rising. And we made the rounds to the other 2 places we'd sent people, hoping they'd made it there. No, we hadn't just left them to fend for themselves at night, though they should have been fairly safe, being inside, away from cameras, while it was dark. Waffles spent most of the night periodically visiting the other house and the bookstore, keeping an eye on them to make sure no monsters attacked. We had a very extensive, repetitive discussion beforehand with him until he understood that he should take different routes for each loop, so that anyone watching wouldn't immediately know what exactly he was doing. It took a few tries from Zoe and Mr. Bailey for him to wrap his head around it, but once he got it, he seemed eager to be in on the plan. I'm proud of him. While he slept in our backyard after an active night, Zoe, Mr. B, and I headed out. Our first stop, the other house. We were relieved to see that there were 18 people inside. They were all still sleeping, on the beds, the couches, even the floors. We'd left a few sleeping bags. Which was understandable, because it was goddamn early and they'd had a hell of a day before that. As Zoe began to quietly hang our stockpiled extra comforters and quilts on the walls, amateur soundproofing, or at least sound muffling, I unpacked the duffel of food I'd brought in the kitchen. Then we went and did the same thing in the bookstore, where we counted 14 people, including the owner of the store, but not including his cat. All of them were asleep too, except for the cat. Mr. B talked to her and tried to explain what he could, although he says she didn't really understand. She at least got the idea enough to know not to venture outside. Then we went out in search of more monsters to kill and people to save. You know, your average Wednesday. In the past month or so, we soundproofed all 3 locations as effectively as we could, directed as many people as possible to them, and killed a fuckton of monsters. Not everyone trusts us enough to actually follow the maps, of course, but some do. And once they're there, now that we have some rudimentary soundproofing, we tell them everything we know. Indoctrination briefs, if you will. We told them about the last city, the trials, our families. The only things I left out were Mr. B's specialness and the details about Nolan. Because they don't need to know that the evil scientist we confronted on the way out was actually my former childhood best friend, or that Mr. Bailey is far from your ordinary cat. Maybe eventually. But I felt like I'd shared enough once I'd told them about my family and rule number 1. It would take too long to recount all of our conversations and events with the new people we've met and housed, so allow me to provide you with a bulleted list of a few of the most interesting and or tragic. The bookstore owner, his name is Jake, was hiding in the storage closet the first time we went over there, dried blood around his ears. His cat, her name is Muffin, was curled up behind the shelves with him. He said nothing, just pointed to the back door. When we went outside, we saw several bodies with exploded heads and a pile of dust and fungi that probably used to be a Sandra. Turns out he managed to kill it somehow on the very first day, but went deaf in the process. He's still working on learning to read lips, so for now it's a lot of note writing. He refuses to talk about exactly what happened or how he killed it. But he's pretty cool. Originally, a little girl and her mom were staying at the other house. We never got to learn their names, because after we told them everything, the mom freaked out and tried to leave the house, after dark. Dylan got them before they'd made it down the street. I tried to run out and save them, shouting Blueberry, but it happened too fast. I saw them dissolve into acid right there on the asphalt. It was horrible. Some idiotic teenage boy claimed he didn't believe us about the last city and thought my rules were stupid. I told him he was being an idiot and he didn't believe that either. At which point I threw my hands in the air and told him to do whatever the fuck he wanted if he was so smart. So he left too, and 3 days later we found his body. The weird thing was, it looked normal. Like, It wasn't headless or similar to a deflated balloon or torn into 50 pieces. It just had one wound in the stomach. Kind of like a knife wound. Could just be a creative or particularly neat monster, but I can't shake the concern that another person might have done it. There's been several instances of sending people to the safe locations, only for them to never make it there. In the streets nearby, we've seen plenty of familiar faces, missing organs or shredded into pieces, hours after we gave them the map. This mostly happened at the beginning, when there were more people and we simply couldn't escort them all. After one particularly bad instance of a man being ripped in half on the sidewalk right in front of the house, a lot of the people inside saw it happen and were wrecks afterwards. We don't send anyone without an escort. One of my least favorite people is Julia. She's in her late 20s, and she's at the other house. She was in a group of people we just found about a week ago. The rest of them are fine, but she's weird. She sits in the corner and stares, but not in a distant, traumatized way, in a way like she's studying everyone else in the house. When she smiles, it doesn't reach her eyes, which are a shade of blue-purple that I've never seen a person have before. Her whole vibe is just off. She creeps me out. On the other hand, one of my favorite people is Oliver. He's a 12-year-old boy who we found in the midst of a mic attack. He's staying at our house, we have people there now too. He reminds me of Justin when we were younger. I'm teaching him how to shoot a gun in our backyard, and I showed him the printed copies of my posts I made before we came here. He seems to like reading them. I think it reminds him that this has happened before and that we survived. Plus, he says I'm funny. I'm a big fan of anyone who appreciates my fantastic humor. Maybe you noticed that I didn't mention Oliver's family, even though we saved him from a mic. If you did, maybe you're like, well, Eli, why wouldn't you kill the mic and save his family, since presumably it had eaten them? And, you know what? That's a fantastic question. Here's the thing, we did kill it. And no one came out. Yeah, not ideal. We successfully murdered the mic, but it didn't spit up anyone it had swallowed before it collapsed in on itself. Even the people we had just seen it eat. Which is already bad news, but then it got worse. Because you know how when a mic dies, it sucks itself in? Well, I mean, this one did do that. But the black hole also grew much larger than I've ever seen it grow before it did. Zoe and I had to drag Oliver backwards for the three of us to avoid getting pulled in, even as the mic was already dying. A bunch of corpses in the street got sucked inside. For a minute, as it simply kept expanding, I really thought that was going to be the super anticlimactic way we died. Luckily, it finally collapsed and vanished, but like I said, not without taking everyone inside and almost us with it. So, unfortunately, I had to update rule number 3. Rule number 3, bears are not native to the city and never have been. If you see a bear or bear-like creature, it's not a bear. Stand totally still and don't move a fucking muscle. Or, if you can get into its blind spot, kill it. Then, for God's sake, back up as far as possible. This means they're evolving. Or maybe it's not evolving so much as the evil assholes behind this are tinkering with them, making adjustments, fine-tuning. This isn't the only evidence we've seen, either. There have been some close calls with other monsters, too, because things have changed. My rules don't always apply anymore. I've had to update several of them. I know, super tragic. I hate doing it. Makes me realize how unprepared I am for every situation, and how only one more close call could be the one that I don't survive. But you know what? I'll share more of those rule updates later. Because right now Zoe is laying in bed, reading her dad's old copy of To Kill a Mockingbird for probably the 100th time, and I want to go cuddle with her before we go to sleep. And I've got to get to sleep soon, because if the last few nights are any indication, Oliver will wake up crying at 4 a.m. after having nightmares of seeing his family die. And like the last few nights, I'll go hug him and read him parts of my stories until he falls asleep in my arms. It's nice to have people to care about again. But damn, is it exhausting. We have 36 people split between the 3 places, if you were wondering, not counting me and Zoe. Which, honestly, is pretty good, all things considered. The less terrified ones have started coming out on grocery trips and patrols searching for survivors with me and Zoe. It's nice. It feels almost like a community. One surrounded by death and monsters and a giant dome, but still, a community. Anyway, I'll continue this catch up later. Right now I'm going to go cuddle with my girlfriend and my cat. But hey, I'm back, bitches. I'm still alive, and not only that, but you get more tragic but wonderfully narrated stories from the vault of Eli's brain. Consider yourselves blessed. Talk to you soon. Oh, and you're welcome.